ferry service as part of a tourist attraction. In the future, I will be happy to further discuss the matter with the trade and members.
Government Bill. This Council resumed the second reading debate on the Electoral Legislation Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2018. Honorables Kwok-kwan, Chairman of the Bills Committee of the Bill, will first address the Council on the Committee's report. Dear President, as the Chairman of the Bills Committee of the Electoral Legislation Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2018, I submit its report to LegCo and present the major highlights of its deliberations. The bill seeks to amend multiple electoral legislation to increase the maximum penalties for certain offenses relating to voters' registration, streamline the mechanism for appeals, claims, and objections relating to registration of electors or voters, and introduce an exemption from criminal liability for incurring election expenses for publishing election advertisement on the Internet, and other technical and miscellaneous amendments. The Bills Committee has held 4 meetings with the administration and received views from the public at one of the meetings. The administration proposed to increase the maximum penalties for making false statements in voter registration from the current maximum penalties of a fine at level 2 and imprisonment for 6 months to a fine at level 3, currently $10,000, and imprisonment for 2 years. Some members expressed concern about the impact of the proposal and whether it may dampen the desire of members of the public to register as electors. The administration explained that the above proposal is taking into account the severity of the offense of making false statement in voter registration and public concerns over the accuracy of registration particulars. The administration has stressed that it would not take a case to court lightly. In case of queries regarding the registration particulars, the Registration and Electoral Office would first seek clarifications from the elector concerned. It does not consider that the proposal would affect the desire of members of the public to register as electors. The administration also proposed to specify in the law that it is the duty of the person lodging a claim or objection, appellant, as they are known, to provide proficient information relevant to the case, so as to inform the revising officer, the election officer, in relation to objections, the person in respect for whom the objection is made on the grounds of the claim or objection. Some members also expressed concern how the assessment would be made as to whether sufficient information has been provided, and requested the administration to give examples to elaborate the meaning of the expression sufficient information. The administration had explained that what information the appellant should provide specifically to be deemed sufficient is subject to the content of the case and the actual circumstances. As the circumstances of each objection or claim are different, it is not practicable to list all possibilities. The administration advises that the relevant amendments serve mainly to clarify that the revising officers shall determine that the objection or claim is unsubstantiated if the information provided by the appellant is insufficient, which it considered that it would assist the revising officer to handle such cases more effectively. Other members expressed concern about whether the objector is to bear the burden of proof under this proposal. The administration has clarified that the objector is not required to bear the burden of proof. However, the revising officer may make a ruling after considering the details of the case, the grounds advanced by the appellant, and the relevant evidence. Furthermore, the members note that under existing objection mechanism, hearings have to be conducted for all claims and objection cases. The administration proposed that for incontrovertible claims objection cases, the revising officer must direct that a case be dismissed, determined without a hearing, and on the basis of written submissions only. According to the administration, this proposal would alleviate the workload of the revising officer and reduce possible inconvenience caused to the electors concerned. The administration advised that the appellants and the person in respect of whom the objection is made can still request to review the ruling made under this mechanism. A hearing will then be conducted if he or she is not satisfied with the revising officer's ruling. The revising officer could dismiss a claim or objection case direct if the appellant or his or her representative does not attend the hearing, regardless of whether the appellant has made representations in writing regarding the case. It is also proposed in the bill to introduce an exemption from criminal liability for incurring election expenses for publishing election advertisement on the internet, which have the general support of members. In response to observations given by the legal advisor to the Bills Committee in relation to the bill, the administration proposed to introduce technical amendments to the bill as delineated in para 2731, which have been accepted by members. President, I so submit the Bills Committee report. I now would like to express my personal views on this bill. President, Hong Kong has held election for the past few decades, and for the insistence on rule of law and fair elections and other commitment to it, the election has been the pride to Hong Kong. And however, the social circumstances to change of this time, and our political environment continue to evolve. Thus, the fairness of the electoral system is under challenge, and there are new issues in regarding to its implementation. This bill proposed by the government is to respond to the concerns and views raised by the public. However, it had yet to address that some of the more pressing problem in our election institution. In the recent legislative elections, President, we witnessed the candidates from the same camp trying to exploit loopholes in our election law. For example, in the same constituency, they have more than one candidates running, and when those candidates in the same camp at the later part of the campaign, and due to some backdoor dealing, they would withdraw from the race successively, that appeal to the electors to transfer their vote to the only candidate in the camp. This evasion of the election laws would lead to unfairness in our elections. Why are we saying this? As we all know, the Hong Kong electoral legislation is very onerous. Will require that there's actually a limit placed on the election expenses. And during the election form, each candidate, whether from political party big or small or unaffiliated, that the time slot are allocated equally. And through the tactic I just mentioned, the camp were able to consolidate the resources of several candidates, and also in the election forum, they were able to dominate the forum by targeting those opposing camp, while the final candidate has sufficient time to outline their political philosophies. The successive withdrawals from the application to concentrate votes on one candidate led to unfairness in our elections. Another clear example that we quickly mention in this chamber. In 2016 legislative election, I was all plain to see the Project Thunderstorm have manipulated the voters' intention, attempt to sway the election results. And you see a lot of analysis in the media. There's a veteran counselor, and even though the polling will be very stable in their polling figures, however, due to this Project Thunder, they were nearly elected or even defeated by surprise. It's simply to win the election at all expense. That manipulate our choice of candidates and let unfairness and distort the election results. Which is a severe challenge to our well-respected electoral institution. Unfortunately, the government have yet to come up with solution, which tacitly tolerate this candidates to continue adopt such tactic to continue to assault our fair electoral system. President, as time changed, our electoral legislations have also contained obsolete provisions. For example, lots of Hong Kong people, due to work or retirement and other reasons, and we living in the mainland. As with the implementation of the Bay Area planning, there are only more Hong Kong people to live in, work, or start a business or retire in the Bay Area. And in the past, we had proposed in the government that in response to the changing living patterns of the public, to target the election advertisement and voting arrangements. However, the government had to come with any concrete proposals for our public consideration. I hope that the government could expeditiously come up with solutions to address this. And finally, according to current arrangements, the district councillors and legislative councillors after the election, they're able to receive a government subsidy to cover some of the election expenses after the election. I made a declaration of interest. I myself, in the 2016 legislative council election, elected through the island constituency, according to existing electoral legislation and mechanism, like other candidates, I'm eligible to receive the government election subsidy. And in 2016 subsidy, there's one candidate that have been disqualified by the government that launched a legal challenge, which made the government have yet to release the subsidy to the candidates. Well, like other island candidates, I'm also falling victim to the current electoral laws. Even one of the candidates have disqualified, even if launched legal proceedings to challenge the government's decision. However, legally, whether this candidate can successfully challenge the government, that would not affect the candidate's right to apply for government subsidy. And however, the existing law provided that if there's any legal proceeding in place, the government will not be able to disperse the subsidy to candidates. I personally hope the administration can expeditiously amend the relevant provisions to rationalize this unreasonable statutes. However, otherwise, at the end of our term, the candidates are still not able to receive their election subsidy. As you can see, there is still a lot of work for the government in dealing with electoral legislation. We hope that the government could keep up the pace to deal with for the few issues I mentioned to reinforce this election institution we're so proud of. I so submit.
Mr. Dennis Kwok. Madam Deputy, I had no intention to speak on this item, but after hearing all the points raised by Mr. Kwok-kwan, I have no choice but to respond. He said that some camps, he dare not refer to the Pan-Democrats specifically. He said that some camps nowadays we field a few candidates, and then the final preferred candidate would appear, and then the other candidates would either withdraw or canvass votes for that candidate. Nowadays, our electoral system is such that if the administration hasn't arbitrarily disqualified the candidature, and these candidates they put questions to candidates. Are you against Hong Kong's independence? And if your answer is no, they put more questions to you. If we have not had such issues of disqualification, do people have to resort to such strategies? And then Mr. Zheng said that somehow a certain person decides who should be returned. Is the disqualification procedures very transparent? Is it well justified? Is it reasonable? Have you ever checked with the candidates? Sometimes the candidate has not even been asked any questions before he was disqualified, and you talk about fairness. You talked about the electoral system being unfair to certain camps or parties. You talked about the final ordained candidate. We don't really know who have the qualifications to join an election and who are the victims. He said that some candidates challenged the fact that they were disqualified, and those returned could not have their subsidy back, and he called himself a victim. Isn't it ridiculous? Who are the victims now? People who are disqualified. Well, you were not disqualified, and voters had voted for their representatives, but now they've been disqualified. Who are the real victims? You dare to call yourself a victim? And Mr. Kwok-kwan also criticized the Thunder movement by Mr. Benny Tai. Supporters of Pan-Democrats would like to coordinate their votes to ensure that their votes will not be wasted. They want to vote for people they support. They want to make good use of their votes. What's wrong with that? What about the liaison office? Doesn't it have its own thunderstorm program? Well, for the legal FC or other professionals, we have a smaller electorate size. What about the so-called Thunderbolt movement of the Chinese liaison office? If you had relied on it, how would have you spread your votes systematically? We understand that Chinese enterprises might call their clients, their staff, and or their associates, asking them not to vote for a certain candidate from the Pan-Democrats. People that are not related to the legal FC at all claimed to have received calls from the Chinese liaison office or people related to the office. Isn't it against the basic law? Isn't it interference with our elections? Isn't it against one country, two system? What nonsense we're talking about? You talked about unfairness in our electoral system. Who is responsible for the unfairness in our electoral system? Is the government, is the central authorities, and also loyalists that support this government and people who support disqualification of candidates or even legislators arbitrarily. Please don't call yourself a victim, calling this system unfair. When you speak, when you advance your arguments, you should think through first and think who are the real victims. Thank you.
Horace Chang, I wish to clarify your misunderstood remarks. Just now, that Dennis Kwok mentioned some statement, for example, Thunder Goat disqualification, and for the as subsidy victims, however, have been distorted the sequence. For example, explain the relationship between exchange expenses and candidates, and she attempted to link to disqualification. When I mentioned Project Thunder Goat, it never mentioned to disqualification. By jumbling the order, that led to some logical misunderstanding. Hope that you've been to clarify this. As I mentioned, the victims, you already did so. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I hope Dennis Kwok just stop as to explain his logical fallacies and for jumping in orders to mislead the public. Any other members wish to speak? Dr. Fernando Chang.
Madam Deputy, I agree with what Mr. Dennis Kwok just said. On how we can further tighten the requirements on expenses and other issues, this is rather a joke. People sound as if these changes would make our system fairer, but Madam Deputy, as you understand, for many parties, they enjoy vast resources compared with the democratic parties, and it is hard to draw clear lines. Before the election starts, you see huge advertisements being put up, and they are not counted towards election expenses. And you see many grocery stores and supermarkets, and they are the satellite organizations of the pro-establishment camp. Dr. Fernando Chang, we are discussing the Electoral Legislation Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2018. I allowed Mr. Dennis Kwok to address what Mr. Horace Chang said, but please focus on the 2018 bill. Because of what Mr. Horace Chang said, he said some parties colluded and came up with a decision, and there was manipulation. Some people quit and others joined, and there is the so-called chosen one. He made it sound as if the pro-Beijing camp is suffering. Please just be fair. Look at the persecutions. There were disqualifications before and after a candidate is elected, and there is a huge gap in resources, and he made it sound as if they are suffering. So how much more manipulation are you going to start? And you are playing the role of victim after all these manipulations. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I will now call upon the Secretary to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs. Madam Deputy, first of all, I'd like to thank the Chairman, Mr. Horace Chang, and members of the Bills Committee on Electoral Legislation Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2018 for their work in the last 3 months and to facilitate the scrutiny of the bill. I would first address the content of the bill before we explain the committee stage amendments to be moved by the administration. To prepare for the next election cycle, based on experience from past elections, we have reviewed various items of electoral legislation to further rationalize electoral procedures and further clarify and align certain items of electoral legislation. As such, we propose improving the VR arrangements through the bill, as well as the electoral procedures for the Chief Executive, Election Committee subsectors, LegCo, and District Councils elections. Details of these amendments are listed in paragraphs 3 to 21 of the LegCo brief. Amendments proposed by the bill are to 4 aspects. 1, optimizing the VR system. 2, expanding the scope of candidates eligible to be appointed revising officers. 3, to introduce an exemption from criminal liability for election expenses incurred by a third party in publishing electoral advertisements that are merely electricity and or internet access charges. And 4, rationalizing the electoral procedures and enhancing certain items of legislation for better clarity and consistency. In terms of enhancing the VR system, we propose raising the maximum penalty for making false statements in voter registration to achieve greater deterrent effect and to improve the claims and objection mechanism to more effectively handle these claims and objections to minimize abuse. And we would also expand the scope of candidates eligible to be appointed revising officers. Currently, only current magistrates can become revising officers. We propose amending the provisions to allow current magistrates, former magistrates, and retired magistrates to become revising officers, and this can allow the judiciary to more flexibly deploy appropriate officers. In terms of exemptions, we suggest introducing an exemption from criminal liability for election expenses incurred by a third party in publishing EAs that are merely electricity and or internet access charges. And while maintaining the impartiality of elections, we would avoid inadvertent breach from the public when they express opinion on the internet. We would also rationalize the electoral procedures and optimize certain items of electoral legislation. We propose clarifying the ballot paper issuing arrangements for the EC subsector elections. 2, rationalizing the counting procedures for the C election. 3, rationalizing the rights for notices issued for the return of forfeiture of election deposit. 4, to deem certain ballot papers clearly invalid to streamline the counting procedures. 5, rationalize the stamping requirement for certain ballot papers. And 6, minor technical amendments, and the details are listed in the electoral brief and BC report. Madam Deputy, even though what members said were not directly related to the bill, they were about the electoral system and electoral legislation, so I'd like to thank members for their views. For all public elections, the government's objective is to ensure that the elections are conducted in a fair, transparent, and impartial manner. As for the relevant legislation, we have to learn from past elections and continue to enhance our system. This has been our practice. Over the course of the work, we must consider different factors, and as such, via different channels, including the panel on constitutional affairs at LegCo, we would consult members for some suggestions and issues, and they might invite diverse views, so we will listen carefully and consider the relevant issues. We must also pay attention to changes in our community. There could be new circumstances or issues So we would need to enhance the relevant legislation. And in terms of the electoral arrangements, we must move with the times. So with the experience learned from the previous election cycle for the 2019 District Council election and before the 2019 District Council election and 2020 legislative elections, we would table legislative amendments to different items of electoral legislation, and all these would be subject to discussion from the Constitutional Affairs Panel of LegCo. Since some of the issues are rather complicated and there are mixed views, time would be needed to consider them. So the time is not yet ripe. Mr. Horace Chung mentioned certain proposals and issues, and they are currently on our radar. Mr. Dennis Kwok talked about the determination of candidacy or the so-called arbitrary disqualifications. I reiterate that the qualification of the candidature is based on the relevant legislation. As for the decisions made by the returning officers, justifications have been laid out clearly, and if there are objections or grievances, an election petition can be filed to the court. And we are serious in our attitude, so there is no case of arbitrary disqualification. So I'd like to clarify this issue. Madam Deputy, having considered the proposal from the Assistant Legal Advisor of the Bills Committee, we would move certain amendments to the bill. They are all technical in nature in order to better clarify the current legislation and the recommended amendments, and they do not involve further policy amendments. The objectives of the amendments are, one, to clarify that in the mechanism for claims and objections on electors or voters, the written submissions would be used to deal with incontrovertible claims and objection cases, and two, to more accurately reflect the arrangement for ballot paper statements prepared by returning officers for the current EC subsequent elections and CE election, and three, to make suitable amendments or additions to references of certain provisions, and four, in the election committee subscribers and election deposit for nomination regulation K569C to clarify the definition of the word subsector, and five, remove obsolete reference to a repeal provision. Madam Deputy, I move the resumption of the second reading of the electoral legislation miscellaneous amendments bill 2018. I hope members can support the bill and pass the bill and the amendments moved by the administration so that the amendments on VR registration and procedures can be effected as soon as possible. Thank you.
I now put a question to you that the electoral legislation miscellaneous amendments bill 2018 be read the second time. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Electoral legislation miscellaneous amendments bill 2018. Council now becomes committee of the whole council to consider the electoral legislation miscellaneous amendment bill 2018.